Hello and welcome to my video where I'm going to show you how to sew flat felled seams. Flat felled seams are a type of seam where the raw edges are completely enclosed, making this seam look neat on both sides. It's a flat seam as well, so comfortable against the skin. These seams are strong and durable, and you'll often see them used to make jeans, although they can also join a wide variety of fabrics, anything from denim to sheer fabric. You may also sometimes see these seams in kids' clothing and activewear because of their durability. Basically, you can use this technique anywhere you want a straight seam, but it's best not to use this on anything heavier than denim because then the seams will be too bulky. If you want the look of a flat-felled seam on heavyweight fabric, then I would suggest that you use a mock flat-felled seam instead. I'll be using a woven cotton blend for these demonstrations, and I'll be using an all-purpose polyester thread. You can use contrast or matching thread depending on how brave you're feeling. I'll be using the standard presser foot on my sewing machine, but if you do these seams quite a lot, you might want to buy a specialist felling or lap seam presser foot. And one last note before we begin is just to say that a flat felled seam can be created on either the front or the back of the fabric, and all of the following methods will create the seam on the front. If you want the seam on the back, you just need to reverse the first step in each method. So if it tells you to put the right sides of the fabric together, you put the wrong sides together instead. I'm going to be showing you a few different demonstrations, and I'll start with the most common method. The first step is to place the fabric pieces wrong sides together, so the right sides will be on the outside. Then pin these in position and sew the pieces together. In this example, I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You'll need to sew this seam using a straight stitch, remembering to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Next, open out the fabric and use your iron to press the seam allowance to one side. Like so. Please don't miss out the pressing steps because they are important for getting a neat finish. And you should now have something like this. Then you need to use your scissors to trim the lower fabric edge down to just under half, so in this case just under 1/4 inch. You then need to fold the wider side over the narrower side so that the wider side doubles back on itself. Then press these folds in place with an iron, making sure when you do this that the seam is an even width all the way along. You can now see that the raw edge is enclosed. Then pin these folds in place and sew all along the folded edge of fabric using a straight stitch. This is called edge stitching. Remember, this is on the right side of the fabric, so make sure you focus on sewing a line parallel to the first line of stitching. Then give the seam a final press, and this is the finished seam. As you can see, it's neat on the front and the back, and the raw edges are completely hidden. The gap between the lines of stitching in this example is about 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to show you an alternative method, method 2, that doesn't require any fabric trimming. This method also allows you to use a twin needle on your sewing machine if you wish. The first step is to place the fabric pieces right sides together. So this time the wrong sides are on the outside. Then offset the top piece of fabric by 3/8 inch. Then fold the bottom edge over the top edge. Then press this fold in place. Pin the fabrics in position and then sew a straight line, again using a straight stitch and back stitching at the beginning and end. You want to sew the line very close to the raw edge, like so. Open out the fabric so the wrong side is facing you and then press the seam to one side. Next, turn over the fabric so the right side is facing you and sew a straight line close to the edge. So in other words, you need to edge stitch. Then sew another line parallel to this one that catches the edge on the wrong side of the fabric. You want to try and be as neat as possible because this is the front of the seam. Because it automatically sews parallel lines, now would be the time to use a twin needle if you have one. Just make sure you've used an appropriate seam allowance to allow you to do this. Then just do a final press and your seam is complete. Here you can see what it looks like from the front and the back, and once again those lines of stitching are about 1/4 inch apart. This method is simple to do, but you do need to sew 3 lines rather than 2. And the back isn't as neat. The advantages though are that there's no fabric trimming required and all edges are sewn down securely, so it is even more durable. And now we're on to method number 3, which is very similar to method 2 except it requires less sewing. The first step is to place the fabric pieces wrong sides together, so the right sides are on the outside. Then offset that top piece of fabric by 3/8 of an inch. Then fold the bottom edge over the top, like so, and press this fold in place. Then pin the fabrics together and sew 1/4 inch in from the folded edge. Then open out the fabric and press the seam allowance to one side, making sure it covers the raw edge. The last step is to pin this fold in position and then sew a straight line just in from the edge, parallel to the first line of stitches. And that's it, the seam is complete. As you can see, we've made a more narrow seam in this example, and the lines of stitching are about 1/8 of an inch apart. This seam is also slightly bulkier, so is best suited to lightweight fabrics. Like method 2, this didn't require any fabric trimming, but unlike method 2, it looks neat on both sides and there's less sewing required. And then last but not least is method number 4. And this one's my favourite because it gets the same result as method number 1, but you don't need to do any fabric trimming. The first step is to place the pieces of fabric wrong sides together. Offset the top piece of fabric by 1/4 inch. Pin the fabric pieces together and then sew a line 1/2 inch from the outer edge. You now have a raw edge that's 1/4 inch wide and one underneath that's 1/2 inch wide. Open the fabric out and fold the wider edge over the narrower edge and press with an iron. Pin and then sew just in from the fold, parallel to the other line of stitching. And that's it, that's method 4 completed. The lines of stitching are about 1/4 inch apart, and as you can see, the seam looks neat on both sides. And that's it, that's all the methods completed. Really, the choice of method is down to what weight of fabric you want to use, whether you want to use a twin needle, and also personal preference. I really hope that was useful for you, and thank you very much for watching.